The Problems with Connecticut Climate Change Policy Part 2. Inaccurate Data. In the first part of this series, we discussed the question of whether man-made global warming was as factual as many of us are led to believe, and concluded that this was not the case. In this second part, we're going to take a look at the different admissions made in the Connecticut climate change papers as to the inaccuracies in their reporting and predictions. Throughout the hundreds of pages of Connecticut climate change policy papers, the writers are forced to vaguely admit that the scientific information that they are presenting is not entirely accurate and is subject to change. In 2003, the state attempted to determine the level of greenhouse gas emissions, GHGs, produced in Connecticut from 1990 to 2000 and added the caveat to their findings that the process was time and labor intensive, and as a result, it was prohibitively difficult for states to produce inventories for more than 1 or 2 years. In the same report, it is stated that, quote, methodologies for estimating greenhouse gas emissions are constantly evolving and key conversion factors change periodically in response to current scientific guidance, end quote. 3 years later, in 2006, they still did not have an accurate way to measure greenhouse gas levels, as they were forced to admit, quote, the third barrier to meeting 2010 greenhouse gas reduction goals relates to the very tools and analytical methods used to assess current and future greenhouse gas emissions reductions. Some methods now in use are either not appropriate or very accurate when used to measure greenhouse gas emissions reductions. This is due in part because the tools and methods developed to assess direct greenhouse gas emissions reductions either do not adequately account for indirect reductions, especially those for energy efficiency, or the assumptions used to verify the reductions are not as precise, end quote. Gathering accurate data continued to be a problem, as exhibited in the 2010 report titled The Impacts of Climate Change on Connecticut Agriculture, Infrastructure, Natural Resources, and Public Health, put out by the Governor's Steering Committee on Climate Change. The Governor's Steering Committee created an adaptation subcommittee consisting of 4 working groups to evaluate the projected impact of climate change in the state. The working group stated that they could not make any specific conclusions using the data provided. Quote, all of the recommendations from the Adaptation Subcommittee work group centered on the need for additional research and monitoring programs to determine more precise risk, including the true financial risk of climate change. Many of the work groups also found it difficult to completely account for all of the features in their assigned universe, prompting the need for further definition, end quote. After making several specific predictions and scenarios of what may occur in the agricultural sector as a result of climate change in the state, the report is forced to concede that, quote, it is difficult to accurately predict the many changes that will affect agricultural productivity in the next few decades, end quote. Some of the statistics and predictions are presented in such a way that they can't be wrong regardless of the true income. For example, they say that global warming will increase rainfall, but they also say that it will increase the frequency of droughts. Quote, precipitation may increase by 5 to 10% by the end of the century. Droughts may increase in frequency, duration, and intensity, end quote. Therefore, whether there is massive rainfall or a drought, these planners can refer back to their predictions and claim they were right, and that the change in weather is a result of global warming. Finally, in the ultimate hedge on their predictions, the Adaptation Subcommittee essentially says that their reporting and predictions could be way off and in the future change dramatically. Quote, change is the most certain element of our future climate. The climate impacts used in this report are based on the best available information at this time, but these projections will certainly change, and possibly very dramatically, as we gain a better understanding of uncertainties in the climate system, e.g., timing of melting ice sheets, tipping points, feedback loops. Therefore, adaptation strategies must continuously evolve and flexibility will be critical, end quote. So while some of these policymakers like to purport themselves to be omniscient beings, it is important to prove otherwise by pointing out their inaccuracies and failed predictions. Thank you for listening, subscribe to the channel, and watch the related videos for more information.